Okay.
last IETF, I had no clue. We didn't use the Chromebook because I couldn't figure it
Right.
out. So after finishing your breakfast, I came up here to play with it. So.
Well, thanks for doing that.
I also made one update on the agenda slide, which is there because we have a 2-hour session. So I put architecture anywhere between 30 and 90 minutes. And I told them just try to see if we can close some of those issues.
Sounds good. Let me get my. Do you want to speak then? You can.
I've already got a presentation later on. Do you want to do the welcome?
Sure.
Because I've got the packet on report, so I'll be up there.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, so.
Okay. Yeah, look at how many notes I took at the BOF.
At the Rat's Paw?
Yeah. Because I wanted to get positions and see, this is why I was like, Roman, we need to show.
Yeah,
do we want to interrupt here? Do we,
exactly.
and
that was great.
Huh?
One of the control I have to show you here if you haven't used it here, because when I was just doing it just now, right, when I go to full screen, and we try to scroll here. Okay, now you can see this one's flipping. The last one was scrolling.
So I was using these yesterday.
Yeah, right. That's those.
Yeah.
But I've noticed that sometimes if it is scrolling and not flipping, then that's you got to go to the this button right
and
there.
there.
Is not toggled.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So sometimes I forget to do that. So.
Well, so yesterday we had all kinds of inconsistencies where sometimes you had to do it, sometimes you didn't.
Yeah.
So
I hear they're at least all in PDF because it's got the PowerPoints converted into PDFs and uploadable.
Okay.
So they should
Thank
be
you for
consistent.
doing all that. Yeah, I ended up spending tons of time trying to get the Rat's Paw stuff going.
So, which one do you person check? I'm going to put on
Just trying to see if I can find people who we can pick on.
I figured we'd let the architectural discussion go through issues until about 10:30. Which leaves a half an hour for the architecture for the OJP.
Till 10:30. Okay.
Because we got.
Because yesterday I started doing the timer.
Okay.
But the BOF is very different than this.
I want to actually get through as many open issues as possible.
Well, if we can close, if
like
we
the
can.
biggest one, we'll see if we can get closure on is the security domain issue. I think is the biggest question. Okay, let's start these. We actually have a second pen.
I have a pen.
I
Oh,
guess we can just pass around that to the other row. I only see one pen up here.
well, I have a pen, so if you want to use.
You might
Is
get
this
it back.
your?
Oh, it's a local one. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think we should start.
All right, it's 9 o'clock. We're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the TEEP working group. Let's see. So it is now Wednesday. Hopefully by now you are well familiar with our Note Well, our IPR issues, and how we conduct the meetings. So I'm not going to read through this. We have been working diligently on 2 of the working group drafts with the authors. So let's do the agenda bashing here. We're going through the logistics right now. We're going to have the authors, Ming and Hannes, go through 2 of the authors, go through the progression that we've been going through on the architecture. In case you are interested, we also have that draft in the GitHub where we've been tracking the issues. So if you want to track them live, please go in and refer to the GitHub. We had actually 2 people participating in the TEEP hackathon. So we'll have Dave provide us a report on what transpired there, and then have Ming provide us an update on the OTRP solution draft.
So our current plan, since this session goes from 9 to 11, right? Our current plan is to allow the architecture discussion to go through as many open issues as we can make good progress on, and then at about 10:30, we'll stop discussion of the issues and move to the OTRP section, meaning items 3 and 4. At about 10:30.
Yep. Any comments, feedback to the agenda? Nope. Okay. So given that, let's go ahead and start going through the architecture since we had. Oh, hold on. Before we move forward, we need logistics. Can we have 2 volunteers, please, to be our note takers? And we need 1 person to help be the Jabber scribe. You're going to be a note taker?
Okay.
Your name, please?
Robin Wilton. Robin Wilton is one of our
Okay.
note takers. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we get 1 more? You could even do it on the Etherpad.
Actually, we
Okay,
prefer
well-
doing it on the Etherpad where the link is up there. We prefer doing it on the Etherpad so that it makes it really easy to find. You don't have to send us the notes afterwards, and both note takers can put stuff into there. If you just came into the room, we are still looking for another note taker.
And 1 Jabber scribe.
If you're still standing up, we're still looking for another note taker.
Yeah, and Jabber scribe. Well, we also need a
Right.
Jabber
Right.
scribe.
Robin Wilton is our first note taker, and so we just need 2 people to be at the, okay,
Well, we do need 1 Jabber scribe, so let's have Michael be the Jabber scribe.
okay, sounds good.
Okay, so
Thank you, Michael. Robin.
thank you, Michael and Robin. Yeah,
Well, in your spare time, you can watch the notes and fill in anything into the notes, so.
okay. Now with that,
That was called our interesting.
yes, works effective. I'm gonna have to bring chocolates next time.
Okay, Ming and Hannes, you guys both want to come up or just Ming come up?
You want to serialize or,
Okay.
okay, do you need the
Hannes can
flipping
start from the
thing?
floor.
All right,
Okay, so Hannes and I will both jointly talk us through these issues. I think we have okay. So let's run this.
It's scrolling. Just a second here.
oh, sorry.
It
What happened?
works.
It's scrolling into the minutes. So,
Oh,
Okay, I can roll this.
we're still trying to figure out the Chromebook thing, so.
Okay.
All right, try now.
Yeah,
There
it
we go.
works. Okay, cool. So agenda has 3 areas we'll talk. Okay, first a quick update on interim work and interim session we have had in last few months. Give a quick update of the document update. Then spend most of the time on the issues we tracked and as progress we made. Yeah? So the time depends on discussion that where chairs make it flexible, 30 to 90 minutes. Yeah? This is a quick one. So we made 3 times from last work group meeting till today. We met in August, September, and October, respectively. We had 3 working sessions and 1 informal interim work group meeting, okay, on October 22nd. So we have the first 2 working sessions, we have authors and we have chairs, and we met there very diligent. They fly in from all places to Montevideo. So thanks to them. And we have an interim meeting that was sending mailing list, and it was open to public, to all. And we have face-to-face meeting in a semantic office there. So anything, chairs, you want to say about that one, interim meeting?
No,
That's good,
no,
thank you.
I mean, I think it was productive, and it really does help to have the GitHub with the issue tracker there, so.
And then, okay, so those ones, and along this, we have now formally a TEEP documents and issues tracking the GitHub, right? Chairs, Nancy and Dave, they help to create the GitHub setup for our domain. And then we tracked the issues reported in the last work group session and from 102. And additional issues we have put there. And so that will help us to track all the comments, inputs. Also, I think others can give comments there too.
I guess I'll also mention that the authors are not only using the GitHub for issue tracking, but also the drafts are on there as well. And so if there are people that want to suggest, say, editorial text or proposed text or whatever, feel free to add those as pull requests for consideration. So.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. And Hannes made it now actually markdown document format. I just spent a lot of time on that. So we had an XML version and now it's both versions. And So next, I talk about the document update. Okay, document update. So we have a version just submitted before this. There's a major few change. I talk about a few changes we have made. First one, major one is that we have Dave Wheeler from Intel joined as a co-editor, and he has helped us to make a editorial change. Also, about the discussion, particularly for SGX. Right, that's very, very helpful. Okay, helpful. So the document change a few areas, two big buckets. One is editorial change. David pretty much rewrite most part of the instruction paragraph. We add more context about what the TE and what the server provider should do. Give more context, it's more information there. We added, expanded the description about the server provider role. The problem statements earlier were 3 points, now add more. So why server provider has the need to manage your trust application, to delete application or update it. Why is those? We added that. With that, this new context diagram is added before the previous flow. So now you can see, so based on this discussion output among the chairs and the authors, a new text diagram added there to reflect the application, new terminology, reflect new actors and components in that. I'll have diagram a little bit later to show you what that means. And we have the terminology update. So you can see the agent, early called OTP agent. Now we agree they call it TEEP broker. Okay, it's a terminology most of our Dave. So it's a broker. And we have earliest application now called application component. You will see, right? It's a trust application. And sometimes say application component, because in some cases it's not truly a standalone application in a sense. So try to reflect some of those kind of meaning there. We also added additional terminology to specify exactly what it means. Device administrator, right? It's intuitively you know what it is, but specify more device administrator role. And root to trust, there were a few debates earlier what the root to trust definition is. You know, there's a definition from global platform, from other spaces. And we have a revised definition there. We clarified the trusted framework and secure boot. In particular, secure boot terminology was completely removed. There was a lot of comments, several comments on secure boot part. It's obsolete. There was a measured boot. There's also support in SGX. There's no secure boot at all. Update the trust anchor, right? So that's an editorial change, I would say, not material in a way. But it's more alignment of terminology in different standards. The major part is we also incorporate change for a few resolved issues. So we're working on there's some issues, comments raised in the last work group session. So now we made a change. For example, we added a section 8, which clearly specify the requirement about algorithm agility and attestation agility, right? So today we say one attestation method. We didn't specify method or namespace or element to specify what attestation to use. It's implicit. Now we say for future agility, maybe we will carry some information there. So that's roughly in that space. Right? So that's a document update. So next I'm going to walk through several issues. We feel we have made good progress. Roughly we have some consensus there. Then this, okay, so this first part. So they have the issues, we have good agreement. Then we have issues we are work in progress. Then there are other issues we need more time to handle it. So roughly 3 sets of issues we're going to go through. Yeah. This one is relatively clear. It's our option. It's one of the issue. By the way, Hannes and I put a lot of issues in GitHub. We're creating order based on the earlier feedback, we didn't really name them by number 1 to 10 or number 1 to 8 by importance. There's no importance priority order. It's purely based on the time we input. So I pick a number here. It's more based on the importance we start to work on. So we say this one low hanging fruit, we can resolve it, we fix it, close it. Yeah. So start with number 5. So you say, go ahead, Hannes.
So I think we can close the issue because with the changes in the document and the submitted version, I believe that this is resolved by now.
Well, that's the point of going through these, is just give one last look. And so as you go through these, state which ones you believe are already in the document, right? Because we'll still go through a last call later on. But right now, the GitHub issues for the ones you're talking about right now are not yet closed. And my intent is to close them either during or right after the meeting based on the notes that says, unless somebody brings it up, we close it. And so by, say, noon today, all the ones that we agree are closed are actually closed before noon today.
Yeah. So this one's there's a few we consider resolve the issues, but I still like it to update you, also give your feedback. You feel this is okay, right? So I think that's.
So I think that should be marked to be closed because that's what we did.
Okay. So that's
I have the issues open on my laptop, so some of these I'll be doing at real time.
Okay, we could do, we could close it after that. So just as like the document change has been made. So really what I try to say here, don't use a secure boot. We change the definition, even clarify trust framework and put a loader key definition. So how to use it, make it optional, trust framework optional, and that updated in both architecture document and product document. So the change is made, so we can really treat it as close.
I think that it's trusted firmware, not trusted framework.
Yeah, trust. Did I have type here? Trust firmware.
You said trusted framework.
Okay, thank you. Trust framework. Trust firmware. Okay, TFW. Yeah. So good. This is a quick one. This next few is just really we have a result. Supposed to be quick. Okay. So this is a definition and then to move on. Right. Algorithm agility that was raised by in last meeting. I said, are you sure? Right. That's just it was already there. We have a supporting arguments element in the protocol. But we didn't say it loud in the documents. Now we add a section 8 talk about that. So that can be considered closed, but product document is not, right? So product document need to add more schema information for that. But architecture-wise, I think it's most probably okay. And related to this one, next one, so attestation agility. This one, a little bit more complex than last one. Lots of algorithms that use ISA, ECC, right? Hash algorithm, that's easy, right? I think well understood. Attestation is tricky. I think there's also what a different format of attestation, how to do, right? In principle, yes, we want to be forward-looking. We support more than one attestation method. But what are those, right? What's mandatory, what's optional? That's still a little bit moving target, I would say.
I think from an architecture point of view, I think it sounds very easy, and I added some text. But as you said, like practical wise, it's a little more challenging. But I was hoping that we could dump in some of the EAT functionality so that we have things a little bit more compartmentalized. So we'll have to figure out at the level of OTRP on how to actually do this properly, because at the moment there isn't that much information in there.
So right now, this issue tracks that the document should say that there's a requirement for attestation agility, right?
Yes, that's in architecture doc.
That statement is now in section 8 in the document. And so the question is there any reason to keep this open, or can we track any further discussion that is necessary to be a different issue? Okay, I hear, yes, we can track it as a different issue. The statement has been added to that this is a requirement, and I don't hear any reasons to not close this, okay?
Okay. Yeah, protocol one we can put in a protocol side of the issue. Maybe we could track that one. Say once the product added, we can close in protocol side. Okay. And root of trust. This also updates the definition. I just code here. So now trust anchor actually is a set of certificate keys. So now we allow it to be public key. Actually, this definition. Public key in a device whose corresponding private key is held by an entity implicitly trusted by device. So it didn't say it must be certificate. That makes it a little bit more flexible, actually. But in practice, what we use today say, when I validate a signer, right, I validate a change to a CS certificate, but you can say it's signed by some public key, like certificate pioneer, right? I just trust only the public key, that can work too. So that gives us actually both flavors. So earlier it's more, we talk about root CS certificate. I think this is a little bit broader. So that's one, I think conceptually it's a major difference, right? It's not small, right? You trust embed a set of a public key versus embed a root CS certificate.
So this
Any
was an
comments
issue-
on that one?
Yeah, this was an issue originally raised in the face-to-face meetings by several people, including Russ, who I see is in the room. And so this was, should the document use the term root of trust or trust anchor? And the sense of the room at the time was that the document should focus on the term trust anchor, and that we should just mention what the relationship was to the term root of trust used in other standards bodies. And so this is the text, I think it was David Wheeler came up
Yeah,
with.
David
this
Wheeler,
text.
yeah,
And
he,
so in the terminology section, you have these two pieces of text, and then after that, the entire rest of the document uses trust anchor. And so do these definitions look okay is kind of the question here before we close this.
So, yeah, I wasn't going to comment on the definitions. Those look fine. But you were talking about public key versus certificate. So is there some statement about what it means to change this trust anchor? Because certificates have
good point,
lifetimes,
yes.
right?
And yeah, I think we, okay, I can bring here. And in the hackathon, we'll talk about the life cycle management, right? Does it mean that, right? So when you have trust anchors, once you embed device, how do you update it, right?
Yes.
Yeah, how to update it. I think we talk about it briefly. I think briefly we say, who owns that? Who is responsible to rotate, update the trust anchors, right? So in practice today, it's most probably like device manufacturers or like a mobile phone case. It's like a phone vendors. But what we expected is some kind of a special trust application, TA inside TE, that is responsible periodically some way to contact the trust anchor initial provider. So whether that new trust anchor that should be updated. So we don't think it will be the end user or device owner because they don't have the knowledge. Maybe they are asked, say, this new trust anchor, you should download a refresh, but the contact should be that the trust anchor definition usually from the device manufacturer as a majority. They may be carriers.
But yeah, I'm not too worried about the mechanisms. It's more about,
The architecture.
are you keeping it open that you don't have to have a lifetime in a certificate? You can have some other methods to know when you need to get a new one.
Yeah.
All right. The other architectural question is actually, this is singular. If you're getting a new one, there's at least a short time when you have both the new and old, so this should be plural. But
yeah, this is plural. This will be a trust anchors as a device.
Yes, I know. By the way, David Wheeler is in queue after Ned.
Yep. So this will be list of certificates, root certificates, or list of public keys. But even that itself, like today, browser vendors manage their trust roots, right? They are responsible for that. And for this, so.
Can a trust anchor be a hash of a public key? That's my understanding of the definition of it.
In my mind, for the moment, I don't think so. I don't know how to verify because in order to today we use PKI here. In order to validate the signature, you need public key itself to verify. If you only have hash, do you apply some other scheme? Use a hash to how to verify?
He's talking about the
Ned,
trust
this is
anchor.
This is a question about the terminology, okay,
Oh.
and not about what you store, right? And so in your case, it might be the public key is the root of trust, but you're not storing the trust anchor per se. You're storing a hash of the trust anchor. It's in your implementation. At the terminology
I see
level,
what. Okay.
Yeah, so
I see.
maybe it's worth clarifying that. That's my working definition of a trust anchor is a hash of a public key.
That's an implementation of what you.
I see. So you said, okay.
Okay, just
Yeah,
a second.
potentially, I said, right. Potentially, you can provide, I say, a chain of certificate up to root, send in your request somewhere, right? But then the trust only hash stored there. you can use what's the end last certificate, for example. Use a hash to compare to save your storage. I think, yeah, it's possible. But what fundamentally is trusted should be the.
So maybe some clarity in the document. Second question, does the definition of root of trust comprehend something as simple as a set of fuses?
A set of what?
Not in current scope, not in current spec we thought about it. Set of users, we don't know how to identify users. Because today as I use active cryptography, as a trusted anchors is a cryptographic provable, like verifiable. They have public key or certificates. Users, I don't know how to define users. I think that's
set
would
of
be
fuses.
Right. You may have eFuse that protects your
fusers.
Sorry, your trust anchor.
Say that again.
You may have eFuse technology protecting your
eFuse,
trust
okay.
anchor,
eFuse, yeah.
but you're asking whether you'd call eFuse the trust anchor itself.
No,
It's like you might-
I switched to the
You
second
might-
bullet,
okay,
which is root of trust.
Oh, yeah,
And
yes.
is
Oh, yeah,
a
root.
set of fuses considered
Yes.
a hardware root of trust?
I'm looking at the audience, but I was going to say yes, but David Wheeler's in
you
queue
as an
next.
individual,
Yeah,
yeah.
sorry, that was me as an individual, yeah.
Yeah, just saying, yeah, Russ. Yeah.
So,
Can I cut in line in front of David? for a
okay,
second?
if you're
This
going
is Russ.
fine.
When you store a hash of the public key, we usually call that a trust anchor fingerprint to distinguish the two. Because what you're doing is then with the thing you want to trust comes the public key. You hash the public key, make sure it matches the fingerprint. And if it does, then you proceed with validation. So if you add that, you can accommodate the environment that Nick wants without complicating the terminology.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so Russ, your
Yeah.
suggestion is to add that in the terminology.
Correct.
Yeah.
So
Makes
we
sense.
will expand. What that means that, let's just say, rephrase it. Our proposal is we'll expand trust anchors to include trust anchors like today, public key certificate or trust anchor fingerprint as a trust validation scheme, right?
Yeah, I know, he's up now. Okay, so
Yeah.
I'm going to move to David. David, you should be live now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes,
Oh, good. Okay. So I think that we are confusing between architecture and implementation. And so a lot of the comments that have come up at this point are really talking about looking at how is this implemented? Where is that public key? Is it in fuses? Is it a hash? And I'm not sure that those are the right things to put into the architecture document. I think we should, instead of adding that complexity into the architecture document, we should be making the definitions crisp and clear to the concepts that we're trying to get across. And then, maybe if we want that in the architecture document, we put that in an appendix. I don't think it's the right thing to do to clutter the trust anchor definition with fingerprints and other things like that. Or my preference would be to move that implementation type of detail to the protocol itself. So, thoughts on that?
okay, so I'm going to ask the question, because what makes sense is to add the new term of the trust anchor fingerprint per Russ's feedback. But my question to you, whether we decide to add it or not, is whether anywhere in the architecture draft or in the OTRP would we actually use that term?
Right. We don't want a term that appears in the terminology and then isn't used anywhere
Right.
in the document, right? And so if it was used in, say, OTRP, but not used in the architecture document, then that term would move to the OTRP document, right? So that's what we're asking is what text would actually use it and which document would said text be in?
I mean, there might be some.
Eric Nordmark, state your
Yeah.
name.
Eric Nordmark. I didn't do that last time either, so I have to rewind the tape. There might be some utility to facilitate the discussion in the working group to have terminology written down, even though you're not using them in the document, right?
So you're
So
a
the-
proponent for adding it,
Yeah, for the time being, I think because, and then you find that, 6 months down the road, it's not being used anywhere and everybody knows about it, we can delete it. But
Yeah, Daniel Migo. So I think I'm going to repeat a little bit what Eric said. As long as we had some discussion around that, maybe that works to have this specified, even though it's not going to be a definition, it could be said by the way we use this fingerprint as hash, so that people don't get confused. I think it's bring readability of the document. I don't think it's necessary in the architecture, but it doesn't hurt.
Sorry if I Vidal. My opinion is that there's a confusion between usage in the document and the definition of the fingerprint, because I don't think we need that. It's just an explanation, in my opinion. So you can add that, but I don't think it's a term that it's used in an architectural document. That's my...
Okay.
Yeah, hear you.
Put me in queue after Hannes.
Yeah, I just scanned through the document, trust anchor usage, and I don't think we in a device. I haven't seen that we actually use anywhere sort of like the fingerprint concept as such. I think for the explanation purposes, it's trust anchor itself is fine at the moment.
It might remove from the text, maybe not to create this.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, just my comments that trust anchor fingerprint more like an implementation in protocol, right? So how you decide to store and protect it.
Right. So I'm in queue next, and so and it looks like David Wheeler is coming back into queue. So David's right after me. So if
We're going to cut the line at Dave Wheeler.
Okay, if there's a desire that it would be useful in the document, even if there's no text that would reference it, then I'm going to propose a way to implement that I'm slightly more comfortable with. Rather than adding a new term, what about adding a sentence at the end of the trust anchor definition that says, because right now it says a public key in a device, okay? Let's say there's a new sentence that says something like, the device might store the public key itself, or might purely store a fingerprint of the public key. Added into the existing definition, not a new definition. But then I think it actually answers Ned's clarity point without having an unreferenced definition. I see several nods from Russ, Hannes, and sorry. Okay,
That can work. That can work.
Okay, David, you're up.
Sure, that sounds fine. I actually wanted to respond to one of the questions about how do you change the public key, especially if it's a raw key. And there is some text. It probably needs some additional clarification, which uses the device administrator to manage the trust anchor list. And we'll probably develop that more over the next month or two. So that it's more clear and create some use cases and things like that. But again, I think that as we go through this process of building out the architecture document, there's always going to be some implementation that may not be able to be fully explained. And at some point we're going to have to cut that off, right? Because we can't cover every possible implementation of a hardware TEE and keys and management of those keys and ad infinitum.
Thank you, Dave. So root of trust and that one, it's
Just move on to the next one.
okay. So terminology, skip that one. So it's this one just change the words. This is assumes that people are okay, but it's more like a mainly automation too. So now this actually, so now talk about device administrator and the device owner. That's we introduce this concept of device administrator. So now we make device administrator is a little bit broader definition, right? It's not means a person, you manage your device, your owner, right? But it's a more entity who responds to administration of your devices, right? Maybe it can do a job through time, right? So we really consider that device administrator manage your devices through time, but we have this entity introduced here. Device owner is more about the user, so that's differentiator. Because that we added a diagram. So I would like to Dave. Dave, you want to talk about next diagram? I have this one here. Hannes, you have comments? Go ahead.
On this one, I think I looked into this, and I believe so. this comment essentially, or the remark that I don't know who the person behind the GitHub handle is, but he was arguing that this device owner was should maybe be replaced by device administrator in text, and I agree to that. We only use device administrators throughout the whole document.
Right. We don't. Right. We didn't really use device owner in sense. And in the document, we rarely touch it.
Yeah,
It means we do not need it.
Yeah, we don't. I don't.
We
think
don't need to
need
measure
that.
it, right?
Yeah, I don't.
That
think,
was right. That was the issue. I see. Okay.
Yeah. So maybe if we replace the device owner in this definition with device administrator, then I think that should be. I think that
We just
this
remove the
issue-
device owner because it's
Yeah.
not quite relevant in sense. It doesn't play
It's
much role.
not. Yeah, not much relevance here.
Is that,
I would say.
Okay, so we have a comment from the remote Jabber, so Michael?
No, he's on the queue.
Oh, he's on the queue.
He's wanting to.
Okay, so he's,
It doesn't show up.
it doesn't show up. So are they not on Meet Echo?
Yeah, they are.
Who's the individual?
Dave Wheeler.
Oh,
I pushed the button, but I don't see anybody queue, so.
yeah, Dave, we don't see you on the queue. Okay, well, we're waiting for that. Did you have a comment?
Yes, about device owner. Device
Name
owner.
again, please, sorry.
Sorry, Fabidal.
Sorry.
The device owner is, in a sense, confusing because owner means that a certain device can be only managed by the initial vendor right? Which may not be the case, right? It may be that the broker will change that if, for example, the company bankrupt or something and there's something, the devices are still alive. They won't be. So I think that's why device owner is kind of misleading. Who's owner? What does it mean owner? So.
Makes sense. I see. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
That's why
so-
we try to
So
maybe
basically, there's
remove that
agreement.
one.
What I'm hearing the comment is, we don't want to use the term device
Yeah,
owner.
we just use the device
administrators
administrator.
and clarify the,
So you're showing the actual text in the document right now, so there's
That
only
is
one
document,
occurrence
we'll
left in the
remove it.
document, which is
Yeah.
the second sub-bullet there.
right.
And so I'm not going to close the issue yet, but if you change one word, we can
remove
close it.
that one.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Mike Jenkins, just to throw a little gas on this. If I were going to define owner, it would be the one who sets the policy for the device, what can be done with the device. The administrator would be the executor of that policy. And then the operator would be the one who presses the buttons when it's being used.
Okay,
Okay.
so,
I haven't
Jabber
seen David
Scribe,
Wheeler.
is David Wheeler still wanting?
That the question from Ming was, does David Wheeler want to be the person that presents the diagram on the next slide?
Yes, it is on our talk. So
Since he composed that diagram.
Is Dave here?
Well, we're trying to see, because we
Not
don't see
that I
on the
will
Meet
talk.
Echo.
I can talk.
Oh,
So
he's
Oh,
coming.
very,
He's
Okay.
coming.
okay, we got you, David. Hold on.
yeah, proof it, Dave. You talk about this diagram.
Okay, you're on,
Okay, great. Sorry for the confusion. So this was a diagram that we pulled together to sort of give a better idea of how all of these things interoperate. So the large box to the left is the device, and that includes the TEEs and the applications and a TEEP broker. Outside of the device, you have one or more TAMs, and the device administrator and the service provider interoperate with the TAMs themselves. So the way the arrows flow is some application on the device, app 1 or app 2, interacts with the TEEP broker to talk with the TAMs. And when everything's all set up, the applications will talk to their respective TAs inside the TEE. What we also show here that's of note is that the TEEP broker can talk to different TAMs depending upon the application's request to the TEEP broker. One of the things that we didn't show in this diagram was how do we handle multiple TEEs? And the way that we decided to handle that is that you just duplicate this entire diagram inside the device. So for a second TEE, applications would talk to a different TEEP broker. So you would have a TEEP broker for each TEE on your platform. And those TEEP brokers could talk to the same TAMs as other TEEP brokers on the platform or to different TAMs. So any questions on that diagram?
Eric, not Mike. So from your description, I gather that there's the ones versus twos are not bound to each other. App one doesn't necessarily only interact with TEEP one, right?
Correct. That's
So
right.
maybe calling them TAM A and TAM B or something? Because
I see.
I see the relationship between the apps and the TAMs are independent.
Yes.
Yeah, correct.
At Smith Intel, it might be helpful to identify which of these components are trusted and which are not.
The TEE
This one,
and
T,
TAM components
this
are
box,
trusted and
this
nobody
is
else.
trusted. Yeah, only this one.
So you want some explicit marker in the diagram?
Or text.
Text, okay.
Okay.
So we could add an asterisk next to the names of things that are trusted and
Make this one
place a
more
comment.
highlighted.
Yeah.
Yeah, highlight
It's
mark.
anything in the TEE and anything in the box labeled TAM.
TAM. Yeah. Well, but I mean, the point is well taken.
Yeah, yeah.
If you put an asterisk and annotate what the asterisk means, then that would address your, okay.
Stephen McCann. Dave, if you have a second device, can that also connect to TAM1 and TAM2 on the right-hand side?
Absolutely. The TAM1 and TAM2 are services outside of the device, and they can and the definition of a TAM is that they service one or more devices. So absolutely yes.
This is Hannes. We had at some point in time an entity relationship diagram. I don't know what happened with that, but to a certain extent that also reflected the relationships, including the trust relationships between the entities.
Right.
Yeah,
okay.
the entity relationship diagram tried to and is still in the document, and it's trying to show the relationship between keys. And I felt it was helpful to, at least it is helpful for me, to have a kindergarten picture to show all of these components and how they interrelate. I think we'll still have the entity relationship diagram, which will focus on the key relationships. We may want to extend that out a little bit for the multiple T's and TAMs, but I think that's still an important diagram to have as well.
I was just wondering whether it makes sense to overload this one, or rather keep that simple and then have the relationships, the trust relationship somewhere else.
Yeah, I'm all for more pictures and keep the pictures simple and communicate a single concept.
So on the multiple T support that I made here, multiple T support is a little bit tricky. As one of the issues was still listed, we may need to work on more detail. Like if application install one TA, it have two TEs. Application somehow needs the TA is managed by which TE, right? But TA is independent of TE. If you have two different TEs now, which type of broker it would talk. So there's a little bit first facilitation there. To now we need to expand the profile for TA. So this TA managed by which TAM may be installable on the which TE. So then it may find a corresponding TEEP broker. So
yeah.
Well, so that should be solved because each TEE is linked to a very specific TEEP broker, and an application is going to talk to a specific TEEP broker on the platform, which will contact the TAM. Now, I think since, and we talked about this, right, that all the communications are leaving the device and going to the TAM. The TAM isn't reaching into a device to start a communication. So the decision about which TAM to talk to is made by the TEEP broker, which is bound to a very specific TEE.
Yes, this is Hannes. The multiple D case is obviously not that common. So
yeah.
so it's one thing to create these diagrams and to replicate sort of the different versions, which I think I agree with Dave that that's a viable way to illustrate that. But software-wise, I'm not sure I fully understand the implications. Like from a TrustZone point of view, that would literally mean a multi-core system, for example, or multiple processors, multiple chips on a single device. And I don't know, but maybe you, Dave, worked on this.
Okay, I'm going to cut the line at Dave.
This is Dave Taylor from the participant mic. We're actually talking not now, for everybody's reference, this is issue number 8 in the issue tracker, which is the
Which
one
we
about
haven't gotten to yet.
multiple. Do you have a separate slide in issue number 8?
Yes, I don't know we can reach there. It's this
Okay.
one.
Right, because I will make a comment on this one, because this is what we've just been discussing for the last 5 minutes, and then maybe we move on to a different issue. The case that David Wheeler, and so you can go back to the diagram now. I just want everybody who's tracking this to know we're on issue number 8. Okay.
Yeah.
So David gave one example, okay, where the application talks to a specific TEEP broker. Another example is where those applications haven't been installed yet. And so it's the installer that talks to the TEEP broker, or perhaps the installer is the TEEP broker in some implementations. And in this case, the case that we talked about last IETF, I think, is a case where your TEEs are heterogeneous. And so a particular binary for an application is compiled in a way that would only run on one of those 2 types of TEEs because they're different, right? They're different processor types or whatever. So when the installer looks in the manifest, it says, here's the requirements for this binary, right? It's this big, it runs on this type of processor, I want to install it, and that tells the installer it's going to go in TE1 or TE number 2. This is a case where the installer makes the decision based on the manifest data. Okay, the thing that's making the decision is not the app in my example, right? In David's example it is, but in my example it's the installer that makes that case. And whether there's one broker or 2 conceptual brokers, conceptually they're 2 separate brokers here, whether they're implemented as 2 different contexts in one process, implementation detail, right? But the point is, installer chooses based on information in the manifest as a second model in addition to one that Dave mentioned. Those are the 2 things we've talked about before, and that's what I think should be captured in issue number 8. And in my opinion, that's what the architecture document should say, is something along those 2 lines, the one that David mentioned, the one that I mentioned, and then that, my opinion is that should be enough to close the issue unless other people have other disagreements. So.
I think we're going to go back to issue number 8, but for now, it sounds like we need to leave it open until we have the clarifying text. Yeah, so let's move on to the next issue.
Yeah. So next one's some issues. Still work in progress. Trust Anchor. I started talking this one. This is newly added one. So in the hackathon we talk about say Trust Anchor, right? Once put it there, how to update it. So what are in principle, what we try to say is it need to be requirement in architecture document, right? You need the protocol there. You need to have a scheme to support Trust Anchor update. So that's the main first line. We thought about the ways how to can do it. So we talk about some kind of a system provision level managed TA, special TA, which can be pre-installed along with TE. And then it can query the policy. So when that new Trust Anchor is available, and it can download and get it somewhere. That may be TE specific, right? So how to offer it may be up scope for the protocol, but that's a requirement that functionality need to be there. Any comments on this one?
Do we believe this one is ready to close?
Yeah.
Authors? From the GitHub notes, I believe it is ready to close, but I want to verify with the authors that they also believe it's ready to close.
So I just created this one. So then, but I think the follow-up work is that we'll change the document, actually document make it a requirement.
Yeah, I think closing is a little bit premature because we still need some text in the document to close it. But
Well, that's what we were trying to verify. So
Well, sorry,
I don't think there's
it.
text.
So-
one.
This one 18 is actually created.
18 is labeled modified introduction.
Oh,
Right number.
no, that's
No.
not.
look at that issue. There's a number, there's an input like a number 31 something, but there's also issue number 17,
Life
18.
cycle management?
Hmm?
You're
Did I put in?
Lifecycle management is 32.
No, that's 32, I think.
Oh, 32? Yeah, okay.
Trust anchor lifecycle management.
Okay,
I think
okay.
that's
Yeah,
the
yeah,
one
that's
you-
what I added.
Okay,
Okay,
gotcha. So the
32?
number
Okay,
18
the
is
number is wrong, sorry.
Oh, so this one should be 32.
The title of
32.
the slide should have number 32, right?
Okay.
That's why I was.
Yeah. The interesting, I saw, did we close that? I saw there was a report had 18 issues open, but well, the last number is 31, 32 is always up.
Okay,
I-
but so you're saying for 32, you have
32.
not added
So we
text?
haven't added the text yet.
Correct.
Yeah, we have not
So
added
it
much
should still
comments.
be open.
Okay, sorry. I was asking about 18, and
Okay.
because I looked up there.
You didn't
Yeah,
mismatch
I
there.
didn't see 18.
That's because it's not already closed. I didn't see it either, that's why.
Yeah,
Okay,
Okay,
sorry for the confusion.
that clarified, okay?
Oh, that's
Okay, so move on to the next issue then. Trust application distribution, this is number 3, and this has a, I think we have an extensive discussion on this, right? We want to support trust application binary distributed by time or by a client application. But we talk about, say, the configuration data that is device specific or TA instance specific. Where do we get data? So what we discussed was TA binaries can be given, right, distributed by either client app or TAM. But if you combine configuration data, will be by time only. The reason for that is configured data should be encrypted, should be protected when it is given to device, right? You cannot put in the client application that would be static. How do you make it dynamic? So that's but for binary, so that one impact is today, TA binary itself is encrypted when it's given from time to device. So nobody can sniff the source code, right? You cannot reverse engineer. But if you choose to bundle your TA binary in client application, then that data most probably not be encrypted because you have to decrypt. You don't have decryption key in device. So that will relax that requirement. But when you make that choice, distribute the TA binary through client app. So that's a security trade-off that to be recognized. I think this issue that in architecture level, it looks like we are almost say we can have agreement.
Yeah, I think also coming out of the last meeting, I think that's what we wanted. But I think where we are not quite there yet, and which is why we can't mark this as closed, is we really need the text in describing the pros and cons of those two approaches, but also there's some side implications like you noted down there with the sort of personalized data or encrypted data transmission and these type of things. But I think that's something we still have to do because I just double checked whether we had that text in there, but it's not.
No, yeah, not there yet.
Eric, not Mark, but there's some text that talks about the service provider being able to get and update the version of the TA. And doesn't that have to be coordinated with the UA part of the app? Sort of like, it seems like, right? I mean,
What do you mean?
the versions have to match, right? The UA part and the TA part.
Yeah, so
And the text right now says that the TAM can just go and say, oh no, you're going to run version 17 of the TA, and now the app doesn't work anymore. So the actual interaction here, I don't know how much of the architecture needs to go into this, but in terms of saying, if the architecture says the TAM can find out the version of the TA, well, I think it needs to be able to find out the version of the UA as well, to be able to check that this ensemble actually works, right, somehow. And it doesn't specify that part, but maybe the document can say less about this stuff as opposed to more, but.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. Obviously, that would be an issue if the API changes that the trusted application provides. The application in the normal world will then obviously have difficulties. Otherwise, it's fully backwards compatible, which may or may not be true. It's a good point. I don't think that's there yet. Like neither in the architecture nor in the OTRP.
Eric, do you want to track this with the same issue? Is that your suggestion? Or do you think it's better to track it with a different issue?
Yeah.
What do you think? Right now, this issue is about whether the binary can come from the TAM or is it allowed to not come from the TAM? And is there only one choice, and if so, which one, or are both choices? And this issue is to track that both are choices. I agree that your issue is one that we should talk about, but I'm not sure yet.
Whether
Making
it's
it a
part of
separate
this
issue that talks about
Yeah.
sort of whatever, version matching or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah. So
right?
maybe we should track that as a separate issue. And if it's a
Okay.
separate issue, then what I'm hearing from the authors is that the authors believe that there is that they understand the direction that the resolution on the screen is what they've heard from the working group, and they need to go off and craft text that says that. Okay. In other words, we have tentative consensus, but we need to see the text before we close it.
Yeah.
Did I hear somebody coming into the queue?
No,
No,
for some
okay.
reason it was you.
Oh, weird. Okay. Okay.
Okay, I'll move on. Next one.
So
So
Eric,
number-
if you don't file it in GitHub, one of us will afterwards, but you're welcome to file it if you want to make sure the language is correct. But otherwise, I will do it sometime later.
From Dave Wheeler, he basically says, I think that, yes, it needs to be a new issue, and I think he's saying he's going to file it.
Okay, great.
Oh.
Thank you, David.
Okay, next issue, this is a more controversial one, I say. Issues that clarify meaning of a secure domain. But inside the mobile say, do we need a secure domain, actually concept? The concern is to say, if you have secure domain, you have a set of API to manage it, this overhead for that. And I also want to say where the secure domain is necessary. So what are at least a few points that have the support versus the counter argument. So secure domain is a concept largely in a global platform, right? For security card, for the card architecture, the secure domain is the foundation there, right? They have the issue secure domain, control secure domain, different secure domain have different set of privilege there. So they use it everywhere, right? Use everywhere. So that's where we have original OTRP was from, and a particular T definition in global platform that's a really associated with the secure domain. It's there. So that's where we feel it's already there, have a large presence there. All right, so we say that's one. Second one says there's cases where secure domain is not used, like SGX, right? So no such concept. Also in IoT, do you really have many secure domains? What that means? So this is kind of a different argument, but I feel that both sides have one side have the need of secure domain for particularly a lot of devices and their architecture. So whether it's we should design for just the optimization. So for the platform like SGX, which doesn't need a secure domain, we implicitly by default says one secure domain per TA, right? Implicit, you don't have to make it to call. But for the Ts that require secure domain to their usage, then they can, based on the T information, they can make a choice. So that may still reduce some overhead of that.
This is Hannes. So I wonder whether we can get away with having this as an optional concept. Because I'm trying to find out how this would apply to my sort of classical sort of TrustZone IoT use cases. And I'm having a really hard time because just the APIs, there's no security domain as such. And it's not just the round trip, which bothers me because I have to then, before I install a new app, I have to create a new security domain. But it's also this key that we create. And I'm trying to figure out what this anonymity.
Yeah, this is kind of own key,
this
right?
was
Say server provider owns a secure domain. You have key associated with secure domain.
Right. So you also need to create a separate, this anonymous attestation key, which is then created, which you then have to reuse and so on. So that's so it's not just the messaging. There's more overhead associated with it. And I don't know if that's maybe it's an exercise for us to find out on how we can sort of have a version that allows that feature versus one that doesn't. But I think it will lead to a considerable complexity reduction if we don't have to use that.
Yeah, I see. others whether they see the need of a secure domain for the other use cases.
So yeah, I don't know how this fits in with the existing protocol data draft, but Eric, not Mark, by the way. The inside a TEE, there's presumably some level of isolation between different TAs, which could be very different for different technologies, right? And the question is, does it make any sense to explicitly manage that in the cases that you have sort of stronger as opposed to weaker isolations between different TAs? And the only thing I can think of is when someone wants to say, well, these TAs, they're two different TAs, but they really are buddies and they should be treated as one and they can do whatever they want to each other, right? Basically share state.
Yeah.
Inside
Same.
the TE.
Yeah.
But other than that, why do you need to manage this thing? And you might want to be able to discover is what are the isolation properties inside the TE on a particular TE, and SP might want to be able to ask that question before deciding to install something. But that doesn't require any other sort of mechanisms to explicitly manage it. So I don't know if we have that use case where people want to build TAs that share state, even though they're sort of associated with different applications. To me, that seems a bit weird.
So what I can say was that two existing TEs. Okay, so I'm one of the user of that TE and the software I have. Two existing TEs. They use the secure domains internally and as a kind of limited resource there. So a number of secure domain you have and a set of trust applications reside in a secure domain. So all those existing TEs they follow that architecture today. So
but the usage pattern, is it that you always create a new TE for a new TA? Or are there any ones that try to reuse a given security domain to put multiple TAs in it?
Implementation, I guess, is based on what I know is that, well, let's say assume you place it in the architecture. They always have secure domain concept. You have one SD per TA. But I know one TE, they have limited resource of a secure domain because in certain space, they have like 16 or 256 kind of a limited number of secure domain as a resource. So that was, and one of the implementing that. And the 2T implementation, they do that. So, and this need to support those TEs, right? So if you don't have that concept, I don't know how much it'll break their adoption, right? We really want I'm still concerned as what adoption they would need to do.
I think maybe that I think that the definition of security domain should be maybe explained in a sense that, for example, for one device, there are TAs that belong to a certain vendor that can talk to each other and can exchange things, but another domain should be for somebody else, which has a new application for the same device that should not be allowed to, because you understand it can be a malicious one that is trying to learn from the other one. It's the Coke Pepsi problem, right? So that's why I think the security domain are, and I'm not sure it's in the document.
That is one use case I know for. I have a mobile application running TrustZone. So we have our own secure domain. So for each vendor, each customer, they give different secure domain.
Yeah.
So how much security enforced? Actually, that's a more next level. Yeah.
Just
but that's the purpose,
that's
that's the motivation behind that.
Okay, David, you're up next. Just a second, let me press the button. Okay, you should be live now.
Okay. So I think one of the concerns I have around the security domain is that in SGX you don't really have that capability. If you create a security domain so that applications can talk to each other or share keys or share things within the TEE, that isn't enabled in SGX in that manner. When we talked about this in the side discussions, I think Ming, the best example that I recall us talking about was management, right? And that's where you really got me to start thinking that the security domain was useful, where I can create a security domain and create a single key that allows me to then manage those applications within that domain.
That's right. Yeah,
And,
multiple.
and I think we need to think about that kind of management, right? Because on the TAM side, if I have to send 25 messages down to a device to do some management that I could have done by, sending a manifest file to the TEEP broker or into the TEE to say, do these things to these applications. I think we need to think seriously about how the management use case works. But I do agree that still the security domain concept and how we map it, especially into SGX, becomes a little bit difficult.
And to Hannes said, we can look at this management use case. Doesn't sound too bizarre. I wonder whether there's a possibility for us to find out with existing trusted apps on what the relationships are with the security domains. I don't know if we can do a sort of like a small survey, whether you survey or whether or somehow else. Because my suspicion is that most of the apps actually have just belong to one security domain rather than multiple security domains. So it's actually
That's a comma. Yeah.
We need to think about like the trade-off between sort of adding the complexity for the case where it's actually rarely ever used. It may be a nice construct theoretically, but then practically it's a little more challenging.
Plus one on a previous, Ned Smith, Intel, plus one on a previous comment about how security domains relate to tenancy and multi-tenancy. I'm looking for intuition on some real world use cases and applications of security domain.
Okay, so as chairs, I can see that there's at least 4 ways we can go in terms of resolving this issue. And I think I hear people arguing against 2 of them and maybe for 2 of them, but let me list them to see. The first one is to say, out of the 4 options, they're sort of in decreasing order of complexity. So option number 1 is security domain concept is mandatory. Everybody does it. That's how the spec was originally written, right? That's option number 1. So far, I haven't heard anybody arguing for that option. Option number 2 is approximately what the document is trying to say now, which is that the notion of security domain is optional, but if it's one-to-one, then you get to skip the round trip. But you still have to keep the key that Hannes was talking about. So option number 2 is you still have some overhead, but there's no overhead in terms of latency. There's just overhead in terms of storage. Option number 3 is the one that I think Hannes was arguing for, but I'm not sure, which is SD is still in the document, but you need to design it in such a way that if you only have one-to-one, there is no overhead whatsoever. You can have an implementation that has no extra keys or whatever else. I think that's what Hannes was arguing for, which was this option number 3 that says, I don't care if somebody else does it, but when I'm doing it, I want to have 0 overhead for doing a security domain. Option number 4, I don't know if I've heard people arguing for it yet, which is to say, let's just remove all concept of security domain from the whole document altogether and force nobody to be able to do it, even those in global platform. Okay, and so those are the 4 options. I think Hannes was arguing for number 3 as I've interpreted it, and I'm curious to know whether that is a rough consensus or if people are still arguing about it or what. So, Eric.
So what Dave brought up about sort of a management thing, being able to, that could be orthogonal to those choices, and maybe that's a different concept that currently is tied to it. But the notion that I have some grouping or tag or whatever saying I could manage these things, I could do things to this collection of TAs. Currently, that's sort of tied in with the SD, but it could be a separate thing if that's a useful thing to do.
Okay, let's see. David Wheeler's in queue next, so we'll see what he has to say. David, you're up.
Yeah, one other thing that we talked about in the sidebars was that when you create a security domain, you're creating a new key, and then you're managing the applications under that key. The benefit from a privacy perspective then is that you tie management of an application to a pseudo-anonymous key, and it's harder for someone to say, oh, here are all the TAs managed by this TAM, and here's other applications managed by this TAM. And so you can see a potential situation if there was an attack that would target particular TAMs. If I've got some pseudo-anonymity anonymity because of the keys, that would really help. And so these were some of the things that Ming had pointed out when we were in Mountain View talking about them, and I think they really need some more discussion. So I'm opposed to making a decision at this point. I think we should do some more exploration and writing about the different options before we make a decision.
Sorindel, I would vote for first option, but from the complexity perspective, I think it's too complicated, and assuming the fact that there are not many cases. There are some in the phone applications, for example, but not so many. So I think that maybe option 2 or 3 are better, because you don't want to make the life of the simpler devices more complicated than there is. For the more advanced devices with AGX and all the stuff, yeah, so I think that option 2 or 3 are, although I will vote for 1, but I think at this point, realistically, we don't need that. So.
Okay, so far, I believe I interpreted David as arguing for option number 2 as giving reasons why that key would be useful.
Right.
Why the overhead of the key would be useful.
But Hannes is going, Hannes, are you in 3?
Yeah, Hannes was the one that didn't like.
Yeah,
the
I was still on 3, but what Dave Wheeler said resonated with me, that we actually have to look at that management use case, and I put it into the as a comment into the issue tracker. I think it's good. I can be convinced otherwise, but I still have to do a little bit of sort of research.
The status quo of the document is that it's trying to do option number 2 right now, right?
Yeah.
And so if we don't have consensus to change it, then that's the de facto answer, because that's what it is right now. Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Eric.
But I think maybe I'm confused, but or not expressing myself well, or both. But the runtime isolation properties of different TAs is potentially orthogonal to wanting to manage them anonymously as a bundle, as a group, as a whatever, right? And if that's the case, maybe we should at least explore this stuff by thinking about those things independently, and then see how things fall out.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, because your comment, Eric, is really about what is the security domain being used for, right? Is the security domain a management concept, or is a security domain an isolation, an isolation concept, right?
Yep.
And that's really falls into the clarifying meaning of security domain.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, right. And that was
Yeah,
where we
to
started
focus
off
at,
initially with the where we had this issue, like, because the security domain concept wasn't well defined. So, and it was initially articulated as a sort of a resource sharing, resource sandboxing case, but then we didn't know what resources are actually being protected here, and why you would share things in the first place between trusted applications.
So it sounds like we can't close that one yet, but I think.
Yeah, I mean, it still sounds like there's not any change yet, but I would leave this issue open
Okay.
for the time being.
I at least have not heard anybody arguing. I have not heard people, I do not think the sense of the room is to go with option number 1 or option number 4 at this point.
Yeah.
And the rest is about clarifying the details, the meaning of how security domains are used, and arguments between options 2 and 3.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds like so. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, but he was willing to do it, so go ahead.
Okay. Next, a few issues 9, 10, 12 are related. That's a quick one. This is mostly from Dave. So it's really try to get a basic experience about install TA in single path.
This one, because I'll cover this in the next presentation.
Okay.
Let's use the time on the other one.
Local T sign in first. I think skip that too. Every reach app talk to time. And we roughly you have a diagram you saw earlier. Through broker, or by the earliest one say every app need to dance, right? Reach app talk with time to initiate a call. I think so. So we agreed that we, I said, most of we can use metadata or installer zone kind of a job. So client application do not have to directly contact the time itself.
So what's the status of this issue as far as the document?
We did. Where did we put a bunch of comment there? We leave it open. Currently it's open.
Okay, currently open.
Yeah, I think.
Is there anything that you want to ask the sense of the room on for number 12? What do the authors need, or what do we think we need in order to get resolution of this one?
This one look to me so. I think it's more like agreed. It's I feel we can close it almost, but at least here is that's
Meaning, we think it's just editorial at this point.
yeah.
Hannes entered in the data tracker, but it was originally a
Yeah.
question that I asked, and so I'm trying to ask this without stating my own opinion. So,
Well,
Do you see
okay.
concern, Hannes? This one? We said that every reach app talk time today, right? There's two parts. There's another part you mentioned that time today. No, reach app need to get to TA information.
so I see David Wheeler in queue, but if you go back to the diagram, I'm giving a heads up to David as I'll hand off to him to answer the question here. Yeah, this diagram right here. The point is this already separates the app from the TEEP broker, and the broker talks to the TAM. So the document already says this. That's my question is, with this right here, it's not the app 1 and app 2 that have aligned to the TAM, it's the TEEP broker. So my question is, does that mean we can close issue number 12 now? Okay, David Wheeler, you're up.
Yeah, this one actually here, this one have a little bit.
David.
No, let David talk.
Yeah.
David.
So I believe we have put some text into the document that separates out the TEEP broker as the one that's talking to the TAM. And we, in the text, we talk that the TEEP broker could be a service, or it could be a library that gets integrated into an application or an installer. I think the thing that's still missing in the document, which is just editorial, is the discussion of a use case where an installer is the one that communicates with the TEEP broker and does all that interaction. But I think that we've resolved this issue and we've all nodded our heads. So it'd be interesting to ask the room if anyone has any concerns or things that isn't closed by that discussion.
As the original person who raised the issue, this diagram resolves my original issue. And so as that person, I am fine closing number 12. If other people want to track other things in there, like David, if you want to keep 12 open to add editorial discussion of installers or something like that, that's up to you. But as the person who originally reported it, I'm okay closing it.
Yeah, I would say as the chair,
Yeah.
if the original commenter,
Yeah.
you being Dave Thaler,
Mhm.
if you're satisfied, I think we should close it. If
Okay.
there are any other issues, so Dave Wheeler, if you think there's anything else missing, to me, I would view that as a different issue. But I didn't hear that. It sounded like Dave Wheeler, you were fine. So,
Yeah, I have my finger on
Yeah.
the close button unless you tell me not to.
No, go. I think we can close it.
okay, let's close it and move
Done.
on because we're
Okay.
running.
Done.
Okay,
On
so
time.
I think we have issues. What the time we have? We don't have to go through.
You have 12 minutes left.
Yeah, just so this one talk about multiple TE versus single TE that we already spent quite some time earlier. So we do want to support multiple TEs, right? That was given in architecture requirements, but there was still.
Yeah, we covered this one earlier in the meeting. Is there any more to say on this one, or should we go to a different one? Okay, let's go to a different one.
This one.
Okay.
Is it in scope? TA depends on another TA and another TA, right? Chaining, right? So I install TA, but TA has another TA prerequisite, right? How to trigger all the chaining installation. So Dave, you want to talk? Because we have an extensive discussion on this. Or
I will say something, and some of this comes from David Wheeler, who may want to, that the complexity point is, and particular dependency was talked about by David Wheeler, and so if he wants to cover those. But the original use cases for this one example use case that I've heard from a couple people is a case where I want to protect the code, meaning I have some secrecy with code in a TA. And so that means the way that I deploy that is I have two TAs, one that is not secret code and serves as like a loader or launcher for the one that is, right? And so you have one TA that depends on another one because you got two TAs, right? So the rich app calls into something that is the public version of the TA. That's the one that has all the secrets necessary to decrypt the other one and then jump into that one. So there's actually two TAs here, one that depends on the other. So that's one use case. And again, that use case is I want to have some intellectual property around the code. And so one of those TAs is private and I can only decrypt it with secrets that are stored inside a different TA. Okay, that's one use case. Okay. There are potentially other use cases, but that's the one that I've heard from multiple people, not just one. And so I thought I'd share that one. One convincing use case is always better than multiple
So I
David
think
Wheeler,
this,
I'll let him come up and talk about the concerns one, which he can do a better job of than I can. So David Wheeler, you're up.
Yeah, so one of my concerns is as we open up the door from there's only one TA to we have dependencies, we start building this list of dependencies, and we open up the door to potential circular dependencies. And then the update problem becomes more difficult because TAs may at one point depend on the same version of a TA, and then an update to one of those will break that dependency and create all kinds of problems. Now, it isn't that those aren't solvable, but they're complex. And I worry that we're creating an Escher diagram here just because it's beautiful and it's rich and wonderful, but I think we're adding more headache to ourselves. And then we add in the discussion of we have to link all those things back to untrusted apps and make sure the updates work there. And so if you have multiple dependencies inside the TEE, you could wind up with multiple dependencies outside. And then I wonder who's going to be the watcher to make sure that as updates are happening to these different pieces, that they don't break something completely, right? That's my concern. So yes, I think there's a potential use for it, but I think we're creating more complexity than we should. So that's
Clarifying question, David. Since I see you'd added issue number 35 is the issue that Eric raised earlier about the dependencies from the untrusted applications. And
Right.
so the clarifying question is the issue, is your concern the same thing that's now tracked in issue 35, or is it different?
It's different. I think that it adds a bit of steroids to the problem, because on the outside with the linking to the UA, then you can have something on the untrusted side helping to keep those updates, and I think it's reasonable that the updates are going to be pushed from the untrusted app side. But in the case where now I've got multiple dependencies inside the TEE, now I have to have something inside the TEE that can coordinate with the updates outside the TEE, and that creates some very unique platform trust issues that I'm not sure we want to get down into.
sorry, Indel, I think that this links back to the security domains question. So the question is, do we want to go for option one? Which I would say that will address this, because trusted and untrusted doesn't matter if they have to collaborate or talk between them. So they have to be in the same security domain. Otherwise, they shouldn't be allowed to, right? So again, I know that's complicate things per Dave's statement. I agree with that. That's why I gave up on option one. But if this is the case, I think we need to bring back the option.
That's interesting.
Eric, not Mark. So Dave Taylor's use case, I'm not sure I understand why it needs to be separate TAs in that case, as opposed to, inside the application, there's a blob that it actually decrypts itself, right? But thinking about it more, I don't understand the security properties, because the key is to decrypt it is inside. So presumably the whole thing is encrypted during transport, whatever, so that no one can actually see what those keys are. But so I'm a bit puzzled by this. But maybe there's other ways where tooling can solve this in terms of how you build the TA as opposed to needing support from the infrastructure.
Since that's a question to me, I will try to channel the different people that I've heard this scenario from, different companies or whatever organizations that I've heard this scenario from, and see if I can guess at the answer. If I take Soren's comment and describe it as if there's a SD that's there, okay, just because that gives me some terminology to use, right? If the launcher, right, the one that's not encrypted, is from, let's say, a company or service provider that has multiple trusted applications, okay? If it has multiple of them that it needs secrecy in, and it wants isolation between those two, then now it has two TAs, okay? They both want encryption. So One way to implement that, like you're talking about, is both of them could have a launcher, okay, that's part of that TA. Another way to implement it is that there is a third TA, which is the launcher that launches both the other two. Those are just two ways to implement.
This is Hannes. I think, Dave, on your use case, I think you should write that down and post it to the list if you haven't done so. I think that would help us. I think that this is not related necessarily to the security domain concept. I actually think that even today we have on a normal world, we have security domain concepts, and still you have ways to talk between different applications despite those security domain concepts. They just have different names. So I don't think that this necessarily pushes us into a specific direction regarding whether we should go for one or the other option that you listed in the earlier discussion. And I think we could solve this or push this into the manifest problem where we are dealing with it anyway. So that may be less of an issue. My use case that I have been thinking about is if you think of a banking app that needs a crypto API implementation of some specific crypto algorithm, obviously that there would be a dependency between these two applications. Or in some sense, they are not, banking application sounds more like an application like a crypto API, but a crypto library. So of course you can munch it together into one binary, but if multiple different applications actually want to make use of that crypto infrastructure, you could argue that that may be a separate component that can then be accessed using whatever API.
I agree. That's a second use case that I've heard that one in a
Yeah,
as well.
but I think what we should probably really look into is actually hack this together to see how this really looks like and how it really works. I have a picture in my head, but I'm not entirely sure whether it really works in that way as I hope. So I think we need to do a little bit more hands-on work to figure out what's the best ways, most seamless way to get this done.
Yeah, I think in the second use case that you described, which yes, I heard that one too, and that was the other one I was trying to think of. Thank you. And that's a use case where the two TAs, being the depender and the dependee, are from different organizations, right? In your example, you have a crypto library from one organization. I grab that TA and I depend on that one. And so that's what raises the types of questions that like David Wheeler was asking. It says, how do I do dependency management with versions when I want to update one, not the other? To me, it's the same question that Eric asked. It's just between two TAs, not between the untrusted app and there. So that's why, to me, it sounds like another instance of issue number 35, which is why I was asking David Wheeler. And a lot of these issues already come up in untrusted applications long before we have, TE and TA concepts, right?
Yeah.
People have to do and deal with all the issues that David Wheeler has.
And we had those discussions also in Suit.
Yeah. And then, in the Zoot manifest discussion. Right?
Yeah, this is related to the point I'd say it's a user case to point out like at least two TS depend on, right? Not too much too deep. But then say, do you want TS belong to different time? So from your example, that use case means different time. If you have a different organization, they may choose different time. That's a more complex, I just say.
So use case number one, the one that I gave, same, Hannes' use case, potentially
The
different.
two. Yeah, okay, so in the interest of time, because there's 2 minutes left, so let me
Yeah.
just conclude.
Yeah.
I think this issue needs to remain open.
Yeah.
But what I'm hearing is we need to, at least in the and while I know it's an architecture draft, I think it merits putting in a couple of the use cases in the draft just to highlight what we mean in the intent of the dependencies,
Yeah.
and then putting thought about how we can propose a path forward. Okay?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think good.
Yeah.
Add some use cases to illustrate this.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so
Okay.
you got
Yeah,
one more,
yeah,
and then
no,
we'll move on.
I think it's just, skip, yeah. Okay,
Okay, so with that, let's
Thank you.
move now. Thank you, Ming. Thank you, Hannes. And now, Dave Flathler, you get to talk about the hackathon.
Well, this makes you stand right up against the screen, doesn't it? Okay.
Since that works.
So Ming and I were at the hackathon, both of us working on actual implementation, trying to implement stuff off of the spec, although he had an implementation that started probably at least before the current version of the spec. Let's see, is this working now? Let's see.
Is it working?
Okay, yes.
Yes.
All right. So our goal, or at least my goal, was to find implementation issues, right? Last IETF, I gave a list of like 10 issues that have been addressed either in the spec or verbally by agreement. And so I try to actually put those into an implementation to see, did those actually resolve things? Can they get it to work and so on? In order to have an OTRP agent inside the TEE, because remember our term is the broker is the piece that's outside, the agent is the term for the thing that's inside, right? In order to have an agent, that means your normative dependencies in the spec for the implementation also should be inside the TEE. So first I had to take implementations of the normative dependencies, which is those JSON web signatures, encryption keys, and port those to run inside a TEE. And so started with the existing open source C implementation that's the GitHub latchset/Josie and ported that. So that was what was accomplished on Saturday. And on Sunday, we actually got into the actual OTRP details. Okay. And so the transport, one of the big open issues was the transport is not really specified in the document. And so we came up with what we think the proposed, between Ming and I, what the proposed transport should say into the document. And so I put that on the next slide, which is the main point of this report. Besides that, the document in the ID, it does not actually include the message that says how the TAM knows what TA a rich app is going to depend on, right? That was I'll show on the next slide, the slide that I showed last time where I show that issue and what we did about that. But this is a slide where the other issue that Ming alluded to that we said we'd come back to here, this one, we did not implement this part, but we said we could implement it if we had more time, which is how does the broker know when to connect to the TAM? Okay, so we said before, well, you need to do that maybe when a rich app is being installed. But what happens if an author wants to update a TAM or update a TA? I got a new version that fixes some bugs and stuff, and so I push that off to the TAM, and so it's sitting there. How does that get installed? Okay, the original TA is already sitting down there. I just have a new version of it. How would I push that down? All right, so what triggers that to happen? Okay, this is not in the document right now. This notion that says, how do you do with policy changes or perhaps binary updates? How would you actually push those out? Okay, and so this is the proposal that we had talked about on Sunday that said, okay, certainly the OTRP agent causes a session to be triggered when a new TA is needed by the app installer, right? That's the one that's already kind of clear. We said also the OTRP agent should be prepared to trigger sessions periodically. And so we said, well, what does that mean? Well, there's at least two possibilities here, and maybe we can allow both possibilities, but these are the things we discussed. The first possibility is, as part of the data that the TEE or that the OTRP agent stores about the TAM, okay, like it has a public key and so on, when it talks to it, it gets an interval. It could say, well, in some implementations, maybe I just periodically go and ask them, once a day, once a month, once a week, whatever that interval is. I just go and ask, hey, any updates for me now? Because otherwise, they may never talk to the TAM. If I'm not installing new applications, I got no reason to talk to the TAM otherwise, right? So if I haven't talked to them in a while, the interval comes along, I connect out to say, hey, I'm here, I'm awake, anything for me now? TAM says, nothing for you now, come back again in 2 weeks from now or whatever, okay? And so that's the first case. This is a case where you actually have to have some conceptual timer running and the ability to wake up even though the device is not doing anything, okay? That's case A. Case B is to say, well, maybe you want that device to be sleepy and go to sleep for long periods of time and not have to wake up on timers or something like that. So I can't predict that. So case number B would be, what if you did it lazily? That only when you're going to be launching some other TA anyway, would you then alert the OTRP agent to say, hey, I'm now running a TA. If you haven't talked to the TAM in longer than 2 weeks or whatever the number is, go and ask them now. Okay, and so the interval is kind of a minimum, and it's the next time you'd wake up and do something anyway. And which one of these might vary by implementation, I don't know. But those are the two ideas that we discussed and aren't in the document right now, other than the new TA is needed is the one that's in the document now.
Okay, I think Dave Wheeler has a question or a comment.
Okay, and David is up first, and I think Hannes.
Oh, sorry, Hannes.
No, it's good.
Okay, Dave, you are on.
Yeah. Dave Thaler, I have a question about how this interval would work. The TEEP broker would, when he communicates to the TAM, does he have to send up a manifest and say, these are the 850 TAs that I have installed and their current version numbers? Or are we requiring the TAM to store that and some, instance identifier or something like that is used by the TAM to
So the document,
identify what's down there.
the OTRP document today takes the second approach, although it doesn't require storage. Okay, and so the second approach, if it stores, then it knows. If it does not store, then that's when it sends the get device state request to say, oh, and now tell me all of your current state. That's the get device state request message, okay, which is there if you don't store it. Okay, but it's the second approach that you described is what the document says now.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Hannes.
Yeah, I was just wondering whether these transport specific details probably would best go into a separate new document in the working group. And here's the reason why. So you've worked on SGX, and Ming focuses more on the mobile phone tablet case.
I work on SGX and TrustZone both.
Okay. In my case, the way how I would have answered those questions differs slightly, because I would have just dumped this into the device management protocol for an IoT. So I would have the transport characteristics there already, and it answers these questions about how do you trigger, how do you send, because there's a machinery around that already in there. So I'm wondering whether we should keep on the OTRP protocol as an application layer protocol, essentially at the level of sort of these payload message passing, and then have a separate document that sort of like defines on how you would use it with a specific transport, and the transport that you have been looking into, and which is probably on the next slide, should go into one document. What do you think about that?
I think that the top half of this slide being the transport and the bottom half, which is about when you do it, are orthogonal. And I think your comments are more about the when you do it discussion than about the transport. But I think you covered some of both, but I want to tease those apart.
Yeah,
two separate
because
things.
I think
is the device management mechanism that says, here's when I do it. That's separate from the transport mechanism.
So but there's a relationship between the two, in my opinion.
Yes.
And in my case, with a device management solution, I would have my answers for the transport details and also for the when to do it would vary.
So why don't you come and ask that after I cover the transport stuff then? Okay.
Yeah, maybe I'll wait for the next slide.
Okay. Well, the next slide is the slide that I had. Let's see. This was the slide that I put up last IETF, which sets the context for the actual slide. So last IETF, I said, here's the model that we wanted that removes extra round trips, right? This is the more optimal case. But here the notion is I'm going to be installing a new application. So typically this is showing an example, which the example is talked about in the document, which is I go to some app store and I'm going to install some rich app, some untrusted app, I think is a new term. I'm going to install some untrusted app, which has a dependency on a trusted app that I don't have. Okay, that's a use case. And so this is showing what happens there. So I have the App Store installer, the thing that's going to be installing the new rich app. Okay, and so that new rich app has a manifest. That manifest has some data in it that includes some metadata about the trusted app it depends on. Okay, it might even include the binary for the trusted app too, right? That was the two different options that Ming talked about earlier. But at least it includes the metadata about it. Like here's the ID that I depend on, and we'll show an ID of the TAM that it needs to talk to. And so we're going to show that that's being expressed, and the proposal is there's a URI of the TAM. Okay, so the manifest here contains the TAM URI and maybe what other data is necessary to know, okay, it needs to go in this type of TEE because it's this class of binary and so on. Okay. So at this point, the installer calls into the TEE, right? It's trusted side, which is the OTRP client or the OTRP agent, right? Whichever term we're using. I think the slide from last IETF, I called it client. I think the document calls it agent, okay? And so it passes across the API this notion that says, hey, I have a new request for TAX. The OTRP client here still hasn't run the new TA. It still hasn't run the new rich app. They haven't been executed yet. It's still being in the process of being installed. Right. So the OTRP client now wants to communicate out with the TAM. Okay. Remember, the URI for the TAM came out of the manifest. Okay. So the broker knows that, right? Because that's kind of public information, right? But in order to have this message come out, that's what the transport has to accomplish. How do we do this? Okay. Because the message that goes out says, well, I'm a FUTE, right? I'm a TrustZone version, whatever. I'm an SGX version, whatever. Or I'm a secure element version, whatever it is, okay? And by the way, I have a request for TAX. TAM, you can choose to reject that or accept it, but I'm just letting you know that somebody's trying to install something that depends on TAX, okay? This is the slide that I walked through last time. Okay, and so this I'm a foo and need TAX. Ming's observation was that I need TAX, or maybe it was my observation, I don't remember now. Our observation was that the I need TAX potentially has some privacy issues that you don't want intermediaries to know that you want to depend on TAX, right? The left side knows and the right side knows, but maybe a network intermediary, you don't want to reveal the fact that you're installing, a blood pressure application or, some other medical application, right? And so this has to be encrypted between those, okay? So there are some requirements for this message being encrypted, okay? But at this point, if you look back at the beginning of this message here, the OTRP client may or may not know anything about the public key of the TAM. It may know the URI, okay? So one case is with a manifest, includes that, but remember the manifest came from an untrusted place, okay? So how do you bind? It says when the connection comes up, OTRP goes from the client to the TAM, but the broker is just an intermediary. It deals with transport only. It doesn't deal with OTRP, okay? But you need a secure session that goes from the client to the TAM so that it can encrypt it with the TAM's public key, okay? So you got to have and know what's the right public key to encrypt with, okay? That's the problem that we need to solve, okay? That we're solving in this discussion, okay? I don't know what happened to our projector here. There we go. All right. This is in one slide what we talked about and implemented most of. We didn't completely finish by the end of that, but we implemented most of this. So if you look at the vertical lines, the OTRP agent is the one on the far left. That's what's running the TEE. The next line over is the broker. The next line over, the TAM has an HTTP server and the OTRP portion that's sitting inside there. So this is showing OTRP inside HTTP or HTTPS, okay? And so here, the first thing that okay, so think about, this is filling in the line that goes from the OTRP client outbound that says, I want to talk to the TAM, right? So the broker doesn't just blindly reach out because the broker doesn't know whether that TA is already installed or not. The client, the OTRP client or agent is the one that knows what TAs are installed, okay? So the broker can't just say, oh, I'm going to connect out to this TAM because that TA might already be installed, okay? So he asks the client, I got a dependency on this thing. You tell me whether it's already okay. So he says, oh, in this case, it's not okay. I need to instantiate a session. So he tells the broker, by the way, I need a session, okay? In that line, here's the flow that happens, okay? Now this is showing a flow that says that the client has no prior knowledge cached about the TAM, okay? The first round trip, the second time you install an application, as we'll talk about, the first round trip can be skipped. But in the first case, I'm installing a new application from a new TAM that I haven't talked to before. It just happens that that TAM will chain up to a trust anchor that's in my trusted list, but I haven't talked to that particular TAM before, okay? And so I have to get that information. So that's the first round trip. The first round trip, you can see HTTP is a client-driven protocol, and that's important because that's the only way you get out through firewalls and NATs and things, okay? So everything is from an HTTP perspective, it's always a request response driven by the broker, okay? However, OTRP is a protocol where it's a request response driven by the TAM. All the requests come from the TAM and go down to the device and come back, okay? So you can see red is the lines that are the OTRP messages initiated by the TAM. Blue is the HTTP messages initiated by the broker, okay? So at the beginning, the broker doesn't have an OTRP message, okay? But he knows that he needs to connect to this TAM because he doesn't have any encryption keys or whatever. So he just makes a regular HTTP or HTTPS connection off to that URI. And at this point, the OTRP server in the TAM says, I now have a connection to this device, okay? But I don't know who this device is because it just came in as an HTTP connection, okay? I didn't get a connection from an OTRP connection that goes all the way to the keys in the OTRP. So at this point, he can send his first message, which is the request, okay? The document has get device state request, and so this includes the TAM's cert, okay? That message goes all the way down to the broker, who just passes on his payload, right? Hands it off to the OTRP agent. OTRP agent now has a TAM cert chain. He can take that cert chain and verify that it chains up to the list of trusted anchors in his list. Says, okay, well, the root of that actually is in my list, or an intermediary is in my list, and therefore I will trust that chain as saying, this is actually a message from a new TAM that I'm willing to trust. That's a policy decision I make. At that point, now I have the public key. Now subsequent messages can be sent, encrypted, and in fact, I can choose to cache that public key. I can say, whenever I talk to this TAM in the future, here's the public key. If it's still in its validity, I can continue to use it because I got the cert chain. If I cache it, that means that any subsequent exchanges don't need this first round trip, right? The first round trip is only on a cache miss. The OTRP client looks and says, do I have for this TAM URI, do I have a cert chain? No, first exchange. Yes, skip first exchange. Okay, so if I do this periodically or whatever, then the first exchange is not there. Second exchange from the HTTP, from the agent side, okay, get device state request needs a response. So he generates the response. Okay, his response contains something that the document didn't yet have, which is this notion of I need TAX. That message didn't appear in there. About a month ago, I posted to the list a proposal that had the term TA dependency notification as a placeholder. That has been merged into, in this proposal, has been merged into get device state response. And so our combined, Ming and I proposal is to take the context of that and to use the get device state response message to communicate that. Now, the side effect of that is, in a case where you're skipping the first exchange because you're installing a second TA from the same TAM, that means you either need a new message or that means you need to be prepared to say, I'm going to send a get device state response with no request. Okay? Because normally this contains the request ID and the transaction ID. If we reuse the same one, that means that the request ID, transaction ID would be absent, okay? Because there isn't one, right? It's just an unsolicited response, right? Okay, so carrying on. The post comes back and says, I need TAX, which is just an extension. We added a field during the hackathon into the existing get device state response, which says, here's the state of my TEE. And we said part of the state is I have a dependency on something I don't have installed. Okay, so we added that into the message during the hackathon, not into the document yet. Okay, and so as this comes in, what he does then is, as according to the normal protocol, is he then verifies that this device is a legal device. It passes all the stuff, and it says whether he's allowed to install this TA or not according to policy. Yeah, this is a TA that's allowed on that device. This is showing the success flow. So assuming that this authorized passes, okay, the next step is he sends off the install. Now, of course, this is showing the optimal case where I don't have this extra create SD message, right? Even in the case where I have security domains, we said last time that we would like the case where the very first TA in the security domain has a side effect of installing the security domain. So if I'm installing 3, the first one has a side effect of doing the security domain, so I don't need an extra message. That's what this is showing, is that optimized flow here. So install TA request comes down to say, here's the TAX, whether it's the decryption key or the actual binary, whatever it is, okay, comes down there. If he needs to create an SD, this is where he does it on the left there, and installs the TA as sort of both things as the side effect there. And then finally it generates the response saying it was successful, if it was successful, and it comes back here. And at this point, the TAM state machine says, I got nothing to do. The guy's now in the desired state. And so I got no more messages to send, okay? And so at this point, he has nothing to send. And so here the HTTP server sends back, because it has to respond to this post request. So it just sends back 200 OK with no payload, okay? And so from the OTR, from the broker's perspective, you can see what the broker does is he opens up something and then just ferries messages back and forth. It's HTTP payloads until he gets a 0-byte response with nothing to do. As soon as the 0-byte response comes, now he stops. Now the broker is now done. He has nothing to hand off to the OTRP agent, right? There's no line that goes left there. He's done, right? So his job is to take HTTP payloads and keep ferrying them back and forth until somebody gives him 0 bytes and stop. So the broker here never sees OTRP. He just sees, blobs that he passes into post requests, okay? And so here you can see, since OTRP is currently specified as JSON, here you can see the content type and accept headers have application JSON. This is what we were working on implementing. And we got about as far as the first message exchange. And so these later issues around SDs we didn't get to during the hackathon. Okay, that's the transport report. Here again, we're using HTTP, typically HTTPS, because to be able to go through arbitrary proxies and firewalls, port 443 HTTPS, we know will work, everything else may not. And so that's why we're using HTTPS as a transport, although for debugging, we think it's useful to use HTTP. And so that's what it says, it's the TAM URI. And in real deployments, it would be an HTTPS URI. In test labs, like at hackathons, you might choose to use an HTTP URI so you can look inside the payload and debug your payloads, but you never actually deploy it that way, okay? And so when you provision the TAM URI, and so when the server knows what he's listening on in a real deployment, he might say, if it comes in across port 80, there's nothing I'm going to do, right? On port 443 is when I'll start the exchange. Okay. All right. That's it. I'm done. Off to Ming.
Thank you. Ming.
I don't know if you're going to take 15 minutes or we can still have questions, but we'll see.
No, I gave you 3 extra minutes. Okay. So
You're nice.
Ming has only got 12 minutes.
Yeah, it should be covered. This so this is a product document. And we have 2 documents: architecture document, product document. So now we focused on more the architecture side because there's issues we want to finalize that one. Then we make more change in product side to match the architecture. So last few months we spend more time on architecture, but we do have a small update on the protocol. Yeah, protocol. Give a quick status update. So it's a first one. It's an editorial. We align the terminology. We change the terminology like trust framework, secure boot, also changed. Agent broker. The terminology changing the architecture. We try to update as soon as we know architecture goes that way. So try to synchronize with architecture document update. So that's one. So that's a document about that. We do have a revision, but that's about those more terminology change. There's no other major change for that. So about the current OTIP have this 7 operations. As you can see, the get device state that David just mentioned. And we do have SD3 APIs we have been talking earlier. But what we want to mainly use the targeted form method, get device state, and this 3, TA, create operation, create, install, update, and delete. Yeah. So it's secret domain we'll see. All right. So that once have final resolution or update document for that. This is more talk about next work. David just mentioned the schema change. First one, talk about this one. The second message, right? After come back from TAM to device need to tell the TAM, say which TS I'm looking forward to install, right? 1 or 2, at least. So that is not a current schema. So based on hackathon and David I talked, so we will expand the schema to include this. But earlier we assumed service provider will supply that to TAM, or the client applications supply that. But we don't have secure way. So this is the right way to add that. So this is one good thing from hackathon. So we say, realize that during implementation we miss this element. So that one schema extension we plan to do. Second is we, based on this one feedback, we plan to add the first one explicit in document to say, the first one is a get call to TAM to initiate that, trigger the TAM, say send get device state call. So in current document, we didn't explicit much. We just say, you call the TAM would know to start. So now we want to make it very clear. So what's the input needed there? What the method? That's a little bit related to the transport protocol. We talk about the GET means HTTP. Right? We say current document says mandatory support, device and TAM must support HTTPS. So we relax a little bit now to support HTTPS or HTTP UI, right? Just UI. But within that one, first method is GET. So Hannes, you have comments on transport. So I wonder whether if IoT has a level, is that HTTP still good to be the baseline, right? So that was okay. First message come in, use the GET.
Yeah. I think the right order. Your observations from the hackathon on regarding the transport, I think they should be captured somewhere. What I have been, and I think HTTP is good for that use case. It's not an ideal mechanism maybe for the IoT case, but what I've been wondering is whether we could take that text and put that. Maybe, for example, the other option would be like a core-based mechanism.
Yeah, we thought about that.
And put that into a document, sort of like transport considerations for OTRP. I think that would make sense, at least to me at the moment.
I think that would be a separate document. I was looking at the charter. So the charter does give us some leeway because we said we would adopt documents to describe the solution. So I think the OTRP is more of the protocol.
Messaging.
Yeah, message
the messaging. And so, Hannes, I think what you're suggesting is more of the workflow.
Yeah, But what Dave presented makes total sense to
Suggesting that
me.
there's potentially multiple transports, right? Because HTTP and COAP would be two potential transports. And I think, Hannes, you're asking whether those should be in separate documents outside of the main OTRP one. And so in theory, we could even adopt, let's say, 3 documents, just hypothetically. We could say that there's one OTRP document, there's one HTTP transport document, and there's one COAP transport document. We could choose to do that by charter.
Yep.
Okay.
That's all I was trying to say.
Okay, so we can follow up with that one.
Sorry, Del. I'm struggling with the question, and maybe it's related to this. Is there a factory initial setting for a device that will imply that immediately need to be updated? Or I didn't see that we cover that case, because a device comes with a certain configuration, right? So that's something I'm not sure it should be in this document, but I'm missing somewhere for this use case. So if you understand, I mean, you have a certain device which is connected later, but it has some initial configurations that it's, the question is it represented in the contact with the broker immediately after the device is online or something like that?
But the configuration is separate.
Not
than the
configuration. I'm talking
communication.
about the keys that are already in
Right.
the.
So some of that should get covered in the architecture. I think what you're describing should be part of the architecture that lists the assumptions, if you will, as well as the requirements.
Perhaps.
Right.
Okay. They have others. When did this hackathon, also some additional ones, I noticed some, this is more about the hackathon implementation. The message I saw somewhere to read through it, say, OSP is some schema we didn't describe, say what the encoding need to be, binary, whatever encoding. So I think a few clarifications I noticed that we'll add that. So list of algorithm, which just says, it's agility there, but what's the enumeration of the algorithms we can give? So it's the with from, because we know from GCE or from the JSON, there will be different names even, but how to describe that, make it interoperable. So just notice that one. And JSON messages, several need more validation. I noticed that one. There's some document update follow up of that. So that's many of you as hackathon related on follow up of that. So that's a security domain. We talk about follow up of that one. Multiple TE support at the protocol level, definitely there's more realize more schema and a message talk with broker, what that means, how to communicate. There's a lot more content to add, expand. So that's a more the follow up work. Then this is a big one, well, of course, support binary from a client app to solve, how to pass that to a broker, right? What's the communication way? Now talk with 2 times, one for binary, one for configuration. All that need to be added. So that's just additional follow-up work.
So on that, I will mention as one of the suit co-chairs, I see another one of my co-chairs is in the room. The discussion in suit has to do with manifest, and one of the discussions in suit is, can you have a manifest that is bundled with the binary or includes pointers to the binary? And I see this as part of an area where the suit work and TEEP work are actually very closely related, and there's some overlap. And anything that suit does in this area, I think we should look at trying to leverage in TEEP, which means that there may be a way for, in one of those options, right, there may be a way for the thing that the TAM is pushing down to be the manifest that does not include the binary. It contains, URLs to the binary or whatever it is, which is one of the options discussed in suit. So suit is 9 to 11 tomorrow morning if you'd like to continue discussion of that topic.
I think it might be useful to have somebody from the suit also present where the overlap would be, just because I'm presuming not everybody will be able to attend. Right. Okay.
Yep.
1 minute left.
That's all I have.
Perfect timing.
Perfect timing.
All right. Thank you, Ming. So logistics, did everybody sign the blue sheets?
Anybody else come in?
So just come on up, and then we've got 1 minute left. So any other comments before we close? All right, so I think we're done. Thank you, everyone. No, it was here. Hey, how are you feeling? Yeah, so Chandra, I don't know when you're leaving. Chandra set up the call for 3 in the morning.
Yeah,
I'm like, yeah, I don't think I'm
he's not
gonna-
getting up at 1 o'clock for me. I'm not getting up at 3 o'clock for him. I don't think you realize.
Well, so I think I made the mistake of dialing in.
Oh, but yeah, no, that's.
I landed and I said, oh, well, we need to get to the hotel at 1 a.m., so I can just stay up an extra 2 hours.
Yeah, I usually don't do that because that sets a precedent and then people try to take advantage of it. And you know, given enough freedom, people are going to book you for 24 hours a day, and it's not going to happen. So yeah, I'm going to tell him that. Well, first of all, I'm going to be on a plane, so I physically can't be. But
So I need like before
so I would not. If I were you, I was here, I would not join a trade. It's not that urgent. It's not that urgent. I mean, TLS 1.3 is not going to take over the world by next week, so we're going to wait a little bit. And
You mean the sky's not falling?
well, yeah.
No, but we need to get things set up early.